A staunch Democrat who left the party over what he calls the gender madness, the warning he sent years ago, and why he says the jig is up for gender identity. Next. Matt Osborne is my guest. He is an editor for The Distance Mag, a politically homeless shelter from woke and left-right discourse, as they call it. But Matt, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hello, Liz. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you write stories about other people, Matt, but I really think it's your own story I'm hoping to focus on here first. In so many ways, I feel like you must be saying, I told you so. But take us back to how you got here, a former Democratic operative. Back in 2016, you were ahead of the curve in so many ways and saw the writing on the wall. But what happened?
Well, I had seen some of my radical feminist friends suffering already and being unpersoned, losing their jobs in the progressive infrastructure because of their views on gender identity. For example, opposing men and women's sports, men and women's prisons, and so on. So I knew that there was a problem before the first election of Donald Trump. But it was only after the election of Donald Trump that I had an encounter at Netroots Nation in 2018, which is the largest conference of sort of online activists and bloggers in the world. And I was there to talk with people about my work in the Doug Jones campaign the year before. And as I sat down for this panel that was ostensibly about what we were going to do now that Roe v. Wade was in greater danger than it had ever been, and of course Roe v. Wade was eventually overturned at the Dobbs decision, I sat down at this panel about the future of reproductive rights to discover that the future of reproductive rights was giving hormones and puberty blockers to children. That was the plan. And what I listened to, it took me actually months to just fully process that what I'd been listening to was a plan for fraud, outright fraud, to charge insurance, to charge Medicaid, to medicalize trans identities in youth without telling the parents. And this is something that I have learned as an entire project. And Brett Bowlby's case is a good example of this, that trans identification wants to run roughshod over the rights of parents to even know what's going on.
Take us back, though. You're hearing this out loud. I think it's very jarring for people to hear about this, that they're actually saying this out loud. What's going through your mind in that moment?
I was thinking to myself, is this fraud that I'm hearing about? Is this a plan for fraud? What exactly do they think connects the reproductive rights fight to this fight? And it was listening to them that I realized they intended to use the sterilizing aspect of trans medicalization to justify it as reproductive freedom, so that parents don't have to know. And when I realized that, I was shocked. And it was at that point that a 6-foot black drag queen began to give a Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman speech about how he was there for his trans sisters of the future who will need abortion rights because of stem cells and uterus transplants. So I got up and I walked out. And I spent the next months trying to figure out what to do. I walked away from Democratic Party politics. I was at the height of my powers, having conversations about potentially getting to a 6-figure income, doing what I was doing at that time as an outside operative. And I just said, I have to leave it all behind. I can't stay here.
Then I understand, Matt, you have an experience in higher education that is also noteworthy here as you talk about your journey.
Well, yes, I had begun to do some hobby writing in military history, but before that point, so I decided to pursue a military history master's degree, which I'm actually graduating next month. And so I went and I asked a military historian professor that I know for a reading list on primitive warfare and origins of war. And he obliged me, and then he told me that he no longer teaches the origins of war, because when you discuss the biological basis for the origins of war, you of course must acknowledge human sex difference. And little children get very upset. Little 20-year-old children get very, very upset if you tell them that men and women are different. and that men's bodies are different from women's bodies. When you show them cave paintings of battles taking place 10,000 years ago, and every single person in the scene is definitely male, they don't like to hear about that. So I was talking to a tenured professor of military history who was afraid to teach the biological origins of war, who was giving trigger warnings in class. And I said, I have to win this fight. I have to turn around and go back and take up this fight, because if we don't win this fight, they're going to kill us all. And if you look at the way that, for example, the State Department wasted so much effort trying to teach Afghan women gender ideology, why? What did that do for them? Did it help them? No, it did not help them at all. It was a waste of time and resources, and ultimately it just shows the kind of strategic level of stupidity that this ideology brings.
So I want to fast forward a bit to what you are doing now. I encourage people to follow you on X. It's Osborne Inc., INK, and then also at Dist Mag, DIST Mag. But recently you wrote a story after the election. It's not just Trump. The jig is up for gender identity in 2025. What did you mean by that, Matt?
Number of things that are starting to happen. And not all of them are the result of Trump's election. There's going to be a hearing on December 4th in the United States Supreme Court. That's going to be the Skermeti case. Skermeti is the Attorney General of Tennessee. Tennessee, of course, is being sued for their law against pediatric sex trait modification, or as I like to call it, child sex lobotomy. And the Attorney General of Alabama has submitted a very important brief in that case that's full of all the evidence that was uncovered in the Alabama ban case. WPATH, the organization that all of these organizations point to, every single one of them, Endocrine Society points at WPATH, the ACLU points at WPATH. WPATH is supposed to be the gold standard for this gender-affirming care, as they call it. But in fact, there are really no standards in the standards. There's no chapter on ethics in the latest version of the standards. There is, however, a chapter on eunuch identities. Eunuch identities for children. We're going to make eunuchs now out of children because that's an identity. These people are nuts, quite frankly. And so WPATH has finally been exposed as an ideological activist organization, not a medical care organization at all, not interested in real medical standards. So all of this has been put before the court. But what the court is really deciding is whether the so-called trans child is what they call in constitutional law a quasi-suspect class. That is, do we have to move heaven and earth in order to protect this particular class of person? Is the state enjoined from laws that might affect this particular class of person? So that is the issue they will decide. And most legal analysts that I pay any attention to who have something intelligent to say about it agree that Tennessee has this right and the Supreme Court will uphold it. And likely, it's supposed to be Chase Strangio of the ACLU who is arguing the case on the other side. So this case looks to go very badly for the Gender Identity Project. So you have, first of all, these state bans that are going to be coming into effect after a Supreme Court decision sometime next year. But then you have Republicans, of course, who are focusing now at last on women's sports, on protecting women's sports, on, for example, the outbreak on Capitol Hill of the debate over the women's bathroom and Sarah McBride and Nancy Mace that you may have seen. It's all coming around that there are going to be political fights. There are going to be hearings, probably in Congress, about WPATH and their so-called standards. So we can expect that there's going to be a lot of different actions taking place in the next year. A lot of us have been saying that 2025 is going to be the year that we turn the corner, and I still believe that. It's going to take a very long time to root out the ideology and for the ideology to expose itself to everyone. But the more Americans learn about gender ideology, the less they like it. Every time they see a male athlete allowed to cheat at sports, every time they learn more about pediatric sex lobotomy, the more they hate it. The approval rate drops over time. So I feel very confident this is the year that we win.
You write in that piece, Donald Trump will not fix this all by himself. Holding his feet to the fire will be essential. We want swift executive action to protect female sports categories, regulatory action to shut down the child sterilizing medical cult, and policy action to remove pronouns and queer theory indoctrination from the federal bureaucracy. We want our single sex and same sex rights back. But I think that is such a good point. The polls show most people do not support any of this. Child sex changes, boys playing girls' sports. And it's interesting. It sounds like after the election, you heard a lot of that this did actually matter. You've been right for years.
Well, I would rather be wrong if that would make everything better. But the fact is that we have been in a bad place because of this ideology. And the ideology is absolutely an elite luxury belief. You may be familiar with those terms. Rob Henderson writes about them a lot. It's something that is brought to us by the top band of society. It is very convenient as an ideology to the people who are in charge of everything. So yes, it is not something that came democratically. It didn't bubble up from the streets, really. It bubbled up from activists. And the activists have deliberately, over the years, have used policy capture. That is bureaucratic force. You take over from the inside, you grab the policymaker and bring them to your side. You bend the policy to your agenda without any public debate. You don't have legislation being passed. You don't have a kind of normal democratic process like we expect around major social changes because they want to just sneak it in and make everybody have to put up with it. That's how athletes like Leah Thomas end up on the medal stand before you know it. It's policy capture, and that's a deliberate strategy at every level.
Matt Osborne, thank you for the work you're doing and appreciate you being here to talk about it.
Thank you for having me, Liz.
That will do it for this episode of Liz Collin Reports. We'll see you next time.